All right, good morning, everyone. We are in the Old Testament book of Judges this morning. The Old Testament book of Judges. Y'all got quiet quick this morning. That was impressive. That's right. I'll kick you out, make you go in the high school class. All right, so we wrapped up last week, lesson 10, talking about Joshua. Into the book of Joshua. Do you remember how the book of Joshua ends and how the book of Judges begins? What do we learn about the nation of Israel? They are going to be disobedient in the book of Judges, but at the beginning of the book of Judges, at the end of the book of Joshua, what's their condition?
Well, they're faithful at the moment.
They're faithful, right? How long are they going to be faithful?
2 generations.
Yeah, they're going to be faithful throughout the days of Joshua and throughout the days of all of the elders that outlived Joshua. But this is Joshua chapter 24 and verse 31. Joshua 24, verse 31. Israel served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who survived Joshua, and had known all the deeds of the Lord which he had performed for Israel. Now they buried the bones of Joseph, which the sons of Israel brought up from Egypt at Shechem, in the piece of ground which Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem, for 100 pieces of money, and they became the inheritance of Joseph's sons. And Eleazar, the son of Aaron, died, and they buried him at Gibeah. Phinehas, his son, which was given him in the hill country of Ephraim. And then we come over to the book of Judges, Judges chapter 1, beginning in verse 1. It came about after the death of Joshua that the sons of Israel inquired of the Lord, saying, "Who shall go up first for us against the Canaanites to fight against them?" And so we are finishing the work of driving out the nations in the land. How is that going to go for us? Not great. Why is it not going to go great for us? Yeah, they just don't do it. And what did God said? If you choose not to do this, what's going to happen? There are going to be thorns in your side. And what are we going to see throughout the period of the Judges here? It's exactly what's going to happen. So as you look through the book of Judges, there's a cycle to the book of Judges. And what is the cycle? Yeah, we sin. And that's it. We're done. They sin. They are captured. Usually for how long? Usually for a period of 20 to 40 years, we're going to be in bondage. Then what's going to happen?
They appeal to God.
We're going to cry out to God for deliverance, and God is going to do what?
Send a judge.
He's going to raise up a deliverer that's called a judge, and this judge is going to deliver the people, and we're going to have rest, and we'll have rest with God for how long? About as long as the judge lives, about as long as they were in bondage, and then the cycle tends to repeat itself, right? Here's a new generation. We've got this sin creeping in again, and the cycle repeats itself. So, chapter 2 and verse 10, if we know a verse out of the book of Judges, perhaps it's this. All that generation also were gathered to their fathers. This is Joshua's generation. And there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord, nor yet the work which he had done for Israel. All right, so here is the challenge. We've got a new generation coming up that either had not been taught or did not learn, one of the two. Looking at the character of Joshua and others, one would think that they had been taught, but for some reason they have not learned, they have not listened. And instead, chapter 2 and verse 11, instead of serving the Lord, who are they going to serve? They're going to serve the false gods. Here they're going to serve Baal. Yes, Lynn?
You mentioned at the end of Joshua, the leaders. And I raising the question, the impact of the leaders, the shepherds, and the people. We know what happened to the people, but the leaders and their effect.
Sure.
on following God.
Do you think there's a lesson here for us? I mean, there are, as we look at the history of Israel, there are moments where they have just extraordinary leaders, right? These are men of renown. These are men of great faith. And then what tends to be the struggle after those men die?
No leader.
Yeah, there's a deficit of leadership. And like in the book of Judges, we're reverting back to sin. Why is that an issue?
Well,
Think through that with me. Why is that an issue? What you got, Mike?
well, today, in one generation, what if we just stop worshiping God in the way, I mean, you can imagine just one generation, you forget about everything you've learned, what we all stand for, what we believe in, the gospel that we obey.
So why does it seem to be such a unique problem when you're going from such a generational leader? Why does that seem to be the life cycle that plays out? That you go from a leader who is renowned, a leader who is strong, a leader like Joshua, to then generation removed from him and we're struggling. What you got, Mike?
Well, reading history and observations, if you don't experience what your elders or leaders are teaching you, then you tend not to either believe or you forget it.
Okay.
If you haven't lived through the hardship, then you don't believe there is a hardship.
Then you don't know the struggles. Okay, good point. Bruce, and then up to Mitch, and then up to Bill.
We talked last week about the stones that they had dedicated to their
The memorial stones at the Jordan River, okay?
Yeah, to their former family members
Uh-huh.
and how God had protected them all throughout the generation. But then we get to these people and they seem to have forgotten them.
Okay. So we're not remembering the lessons that we're needing to remember. Mitch, what you got?
I was just going to say that leadership, I mean, there's some people who are natural leaders, but a lot of times leadership is something that is trained and learned and that sort of thing. And, maybe Moses did a better job training Joshua than...
We don't have any comment for Joshua like we had with Moses and Joshua. That, right, scattered throughout the Pentateuch, we've got these references to Joshua being Moses' assistant. And then he's the next one to take up the mantle, so to speak. You've got the same kind of relationship with Elijah and Elisha, right? But we don't see something like that with Joshua. There may have been, we just might not know about it, but it is interesting that it's not mentioned, and suddenly we see Israel being bereft of leadership. What might that communicate to us in a local church today?
We need to spend as much time leading as we do teaching the next generation.
Okay. Do we need to work at bringing up leaders?
Yes.
Right? Jamie, what you got?
I think another problem is we've seen throughout time, probably in our own lives, you have a great leader and people follow the person instead of God.
Instead of the convictions that the leader has are not shared by the ones who are following him. And ideally, that's what you're going to have. You're going to have a sharing of convictions and focus there. It's a good point. Hold on. Let me get over to Bill and then over to you, Michael.
If you don't have good continuity of good, strong leadership, by that I mean leaders that are teaching the Bible, the Word of God, then they depart from that.
Okay.
And so the congregation or the church kind of goes the way of the leader.
Okay.
They're led by a corrupt leader
Okay.
all throughout the Bible.
Michael?
I just want to give an example right now. How many of us actually ever served in World War II, Iraqi freedom? We never served like we've heard of it, or we've never been there. But the thing is, it's like the Bible. Did we actually see Moses? Did we see Abraham? No, but we've heard of them from other people who actually pass it down from generation to generation. But the thing is, if your parents aren't
So one thing that leaders have to be active in is teaching, instruction, showing how to lead and how to lead properly. Jim, put a bow on it for us.
Back in the days when I was an elder, we interviewed people who wanted to become members. One thing that I used to emphasize, and I still believe it, is that every man who is a Christian should aspire to be an elder. And he may never be one, but he needs to lead his life, conduct his life, and study so that he's prepared to do that should the occasion arise. You have to replace yourself if you're a leader. That's one of the most important things you can do.
Being humble enough to realize I'm not going to be here forever and I'm not going to be able to serve forever. And with that humility of mind, then being able to train up others who were able to take their stand in the place where you have
Have
been.
enough people prepared, then we can be like the old priesthood where you served from 30 to 50 or whatever it was and then turned it over to the next generation. Right now, we have a problem sometimes finding men who are, one, willing especially, and then qualified to be elders.
Good point. It's a fair point. All right, so leadership is important. Israel is bereft of leadership. What happens when you're bereft of leadership? You're like sheep who are scattered, right? Jesus bemoans that in the Gospels, and we see that playing out kind of on the landscape of Israel at this time. So we talk about the cycle here in paragraph 3. Israel turns away from God. God allows her to be taken captive. Israel cries out in repentance to God. God raises up a deliverer. This is mentioned, I think, Judges, I think we've got that reference here, chapter 2 and verse 16. The Lord raised up judges who delivered them from the hands of those who plundered them, right? We're not talking about gavel and powdered wig, right? We're talking about those who are going to raise up and judge the righteous from the unrighteous and do this work for God. And then they're going to spend a little bit of time ruling over God's people and in a sense judging there. And then once they die, here comes the cycle. Again, Israel's going to fall away within a generation, and we're going to have to be restored.
So we're talking about leadership rightfully because in the Judges, that's what we're talking about is those cycles where the people are lacking a leader. But the real problem is God was their leader, and the people lost sight of that. You know, that without God's word and the leadership that God's trying to provide, if we reject that, then
Sure.
the manner of men is to sin.
This is the message of 1 Peter chapter 5, for instance.
Right.
That when you're serving as a shepherd in the local church, you're not a dictatorial shepherd. You are an under shepherd to the chief shepherd, right? Good leaders are good followers.
And then what you're doing is helping to show the people by example and through teaching. This is what the Lord would have us do.
Sure, absolutely. All right, so who are our judges? Do you remember? Can you think back to Bible class when you were 8 years old and sing the song? Who's our first? You don't know the song, Rod? Oh yeah, it's a song. Isn't everything a song if you try hard enough and got a wise enough Bible class teacher? Who's our first one? Othniel, very good. You're done for the day. Great job. And who are we going to end with most likely? Yeah, there's a debate whether you're ending with Samson or ending with Eli or ending with Samuel. We're just for the sake of ease this morning going to say that we're going to end with Samuel, although I recognize there's some discussion about that. What is the big problem in Israel during the period of the Judges? It's going to be idolatry, right? Now, we're going to skip ahead for just a moment. This continues to be a problem in the life cycle of Israel until what period of time?
So they're taken away in captivity.
When they're taken away into Babylonian captivity that turns into Persian captivity, and then they're told to go home. And when Israel returns home after that 70 years of captivity, what do we never read about being a big issue in Israel again? Idolatry. God sent them off for 70 years, He humbled them. And what did God's punishment accomplish?
They were corrected.
He said, I'm going to refine you in the fires for 70 years. And what happened? He burned the idolatry out of them, and they come back, and what is no longer a part of them? Idolatry. Sometimes God takes drastic steps, but those drastic steps bring about what?
Salvation, repentance.
Yeah. Repentance, forgiveness, righteousness, holiness, faithfulness. God knows what he's doing. Idolatry is going to be one of the largest problems. Two main sources of idolatry, two main gods that are going to be worshipped. Who are they? Baal. Asherah, Ashtaroth, Astarte, depending on the translation that you're reading from. Asherah, Ashtoreth, Astarte, all seem to be referring to the same false god. It's just a matter of spelling it and what culture you're in. The Baal is going to be different than the Asherah or the Ashtoreth. But those are going to be the two false gods and false religions that the Israelites are going to struggle with the most. Who are going to be the nations that plague them the most? Right, this is where we really encounter the Philistines, is here in the book of Judges. They're going to be a problem. Who else is going to be a problem here? The Midianites. Who else?
Moab.
The Moabites, right. These three are really going to be challenges to Israel in this time period. When you close out the book of Judges, come over here to the very end of the book of Judges. Following the end of the book of Judges, we get one little small book. What is it? Ruth. And then we're transitioning immediately into what? The books of history. 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Very good. Okay. So if Ruth is there for a reason, I'm not sure if Ruth is chronologically at this point, but we do see a chronological connection between the end of the book of Judges and the beginning of the book of 1 Samuel. Right? And so we leave the book of Judges in perhaps one of the darkest moments in Israel's history. What is it?
Civil War.
We've got a civil war going on. And what is the very last verse in the book of Judges? In those days there was no king. Everyone is doing whatever is right in their own eyes. Okay? Well, not absolutely everybody. This is a generalized statement, of course, because we're going to come over to the book of 1 Samuel, and who do we encounter? Yeah, we get Hannah. And what's Hannah doing? She's praying. Praying to God for a son. She's here at the tabernacle. She's faithful. Here comes a son that's going to be given to her, Samuel, a son who's going to rise to be someone extremely noteworthy in the history of Israel. Samuel's going to reign seemingly as a judge. He's going to serve as a prophet. And it's during his reign that Israel's finally going to ask for what? Going to ask for a king. And to Brother Roach's point, what is so bad about them asking for a king?
God was their king.
God was their king. So in asking for a physical king to be set over them, they are rejecting God. We'll talk more about that in just a second. This displeases God, but God allows them to go ahead with their decision. If this is what you want, I've warned you against it, but if this is what you want, here's what you're going to get. But I've warned you beforehand. And so this is where this section of the Old Testament narrative for our purposes is going to end this morning. So what was a judge? Let's get over to our questions. Let's work through these a little bit. What was a judge? A deliverer. That's a good way of putting it, right? That's from Judges chapter 2, verses 16 through 19. When we're dealing with the outside nations, a judge is a deliverer. When we're dealing within the nation, primarily, a judge was what?
Leader.
A leader. Okay. Primarily was a what? Judge, right? What is Deborah? Is it Deborah between the two terebinth trees? What is she doing? She sat there judging Israel, right? People would bring their There are cases to her. And so we've got a little bit of mixed duty going on here for judges. Now, here's a moment you get to share, okay? Because you all dutifully read the book of Judges this week, right? So, what judge interests you the most and why? You did answer question number 2 on your notebook, yes? Question number 2, which judge do you find the most interesting and why? Connie, did I see your hand up?
Yes.
Go ahead.
You know, I like Deborah because in a very male-dominated society, here's this woman who is taking a leadership role,
Okay.
and she is respected for it.
She is.
So I think that's very interesting.
It's perhaps it's something we need to open our eyes to. Is that we often are looking for biblical characters with whom we can associate. Right? Perhaps this is why so many of us feel comfortable with Peter. Because so many of us, and myself included in this number, can speak before we think, can make great promises of faithfulness and sometimes not carry them out as we intend. And so, as a dad to 2 daughters, I need to have my eyes open to the characters in the Bible with which my daughters might have a particular draw. To people like Deborah or Ruth that we spoke about moments ago, or Mary or someone like that. Not to say that these are the only Bible characters. We all recognize they're not. Can we recognize that sometimes we have draws to particular characters who might more closely resemble us and where we are in some of the unique struggles that I might face in my own life? And so I think that's a good thought there, Connie. So Deborah, Brother Evans.
Jephthah is the most intriguing to me.
Okay, why is Jephthah the most intriguing to you?
Well, he's kicked out of his house, he becomes a gang leader, then he becomes a judge.
This is Judges chapter 12, correct?
Then he makes this vow to God, if you'll give the Ammonites to me, whatever comes out of
My house first.
I'm going to do
Why
it.
do you make that promise?
Yeah, and I'm thinking, what did you think was going to come
Exactly.
out? Was the cat going to come out of the house? I don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah. And then how that was actually resolved is a matter of great debate.
Yes, it is.
But anyway, he's the most intriguing.
Okay, there you go. That has sat in the back of my... Why do you say whatever comes out of my house? Are you trying to get rid of your wife, maybe? Sorry. You came out first, honey. Right. Any of us who are dads who come home after being away, who's normally running up the sidewalk to come see you? Right? It's a kid, right? So I wonder.
Seriously, I wondered, did he have a dog you didn't like and the dog?
I don't know. Questions we can ask when we get there, right?
For such a smart fella, he said such a dumb thing, which gives me great hope.
I resemble that remark. All right, who else? Brother Roach.
Speaking of dumb things.
Oh, dear.
He's the most famous, but he's so very, very foolish. It's tragic what he did and foolishness.
And you're talking about?
That he was betrayed by a woman because he was indulged by that.
Are you talking about Samson?
Yeah,
Sorry, I didn't hear the name. I'm sorry.
Samson.
Yes, gotcha. Very good. Yes, Samson's story is one that's interesting.
Just piggybacking on that most other deliverers, most other judges seem to be more stereotypical leader, like they're going to rally people behind them, they're going to lead by example. And Samson's the opposite, at least from what we see. Like, we don't see him sitting at a tree like Deborah.
No.
We don't see him leading into battle like Jephthah or Gideon. He is
Capturing foxes.
Yeah, he's
And-
often by himself, and he's, if we're being fair, often seems to be self-centered and obnoxious. But he delivers Israel by what he's doing.
God can use all sorts of people in His service. Danica?
Speaking of which, Gideon.
Gideon.
As somebody who came from nothing and did so much with so little because of God.
Good point.
What about Eli? Wasn't Eli one of them, or?
I tend to think so, yes.
Yeah. There's a lot about him that's
Yeah.
written because he had kids that were out of train Samuel too, somewhat. I mean, you read more, maybe more about him in the book of Samuel, maybe,
Yeah.
but he seemed like he had some positives about him, but at the same time had some, somebody you look to for making judgment to have such rotten kids, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I mean, it happens, I guess, but.
To those of you who in a past life or current life but are in here right now were 3rd to 6th grade Bible class teachers, who's the 3rd to 6th grade boys' favorite judge? Ehud. Why is Ehud the favorite? Because he stabs the fat guy, right? And then you get to talk about how the fat sucks in the dagger and all of that, and that's a story. I wrote 2 down. Connie, going along with yours, I wrote down Barak in addition to Deborah. His dedication, but his selflessness, right? He cares more about the people and more about victory than he does necessarily getting acclaim or anything like that for himself. And then I wrote down Shamgar as well. Shamgar gets all of what in the book of Judges?
2 verses.
Yeah. We've got Shamgar, the son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. What's an ox goad?
It's like a point.
Pointy stick, right? This is the same thing that Paul is encountered with in Acts 9, in Acts 22, and in Acts 26. When Saul's recounting his conversion, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the pricks or kick against the goads. It's a sharp, pointy stick you would use to hit an animal's hindquarters to make them go. And using the equivalent of an overhead screen pointer, Shamgar kills 600 Philistines. And then mic drop, we're done with his story and we're moving on. I want to know more about Shamgar. That's kind of an interesting character there. Anyone else got to get theirs out before we move on? Here's your last chance. Now, also, the reason I do that, you learn something about people by the Bible characters that they look to. And I think we learn something about ourselves and something about others when we're seeing which of these judges we relate to. So just maybe think about that. Number 3, what choices set the stage of Israel's struggle with idolatry? They don't get everybody out of the land. God has told them when you come to the land to clear them out. Right? And is it Israel that's really having to exert monumental effort to clear the land out? All they got to do is what? All they got to do is serve God. Serve God, and He's going to do it. Gracious, He's knocked down walls with you shouting. He's sent hornets to drive out the people. There's not a whole lot that you're having to do here except just trust Him and follow Him and do what He says. It's not like we're going up to battle and I'm not sure we're going to win. You're going to win if what? You're going to win if you're going to be there with God. So their failure to drive out all the foreigners, and that's described in Judges chapter 1. Judges chapter 1 and verse 27, for instance. Manasseh did not take possession of Beth-shean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages. And so the Canaanites persisted living in the land, and that's going to set the stage for the struggles that Israel has. Yes, Lynn?
Can't help but think maybe they had it too good with the milk and honey. Physical.
Yeah. They got lackadaisical? That's certainly a possibility. Just a so you know, an interesting note here. Verse 27, Megiddo. If you underline that and maybe search for that word throughout your Old Testaments later, this is the word that is connected to the New Testament word Armageddon. Megiddo, the valley of Megiddo is what's going to be referenced when you're talking about Armageddon in the New Testament. And so if you're ever interested in that, a study on this word Megiddo was a good place to begin. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 2. 1 Samuel chapter 2. What did Eli give to his sons that Samuel did not give to his sons? And I think I've got that. Yeah, switch that around. What did Eli not give to his sons? This is 1 Samuel chapter 2 and verse 22.
Discipline.
No, Eli does give it. Samuel doesn't give it to his. I am right. Yeah. Eli gives his children discipline. 1 Samuel chapter 2. A capítulo 2, verso 22. Eli was very old. He heard all that his sons were doing to Israel, how they lay with the women who served at the door of the tent of meeting. He said to them, "Why do you do such things, the evil things that I hear from all of these people? No, my sons, for the report is not good which I hear the Lord's people circulating. If one man sins against another, God will mediate for him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him?" But they would not listen to the voice of their father, for the Lord desired to put them to death. And we come later and we look at Samuel's sons, and we don't see anything like that. That seems to be one distinguishing mark between Eli and Samuel, that one of them tries to discipline and reprove their children, whereas the other one does not. We'll say more about that in just a while. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 8 and verse 5. Why does Israel say they want a king?
Everybody else has one.
Well, first, chapter 8 and verse 5. Why do they want a king?
You're getting old and your sons are no good.
Okay, so here's the difference between Eli and Samuel, it seems. Eli has offered rebuke to his sons, whereas Samuel seems to have not done so. Travis?
Well, when the Lord talked to Samuel in the night, he said Eli did not rebuke them. Eli did. You're saying Eli did. There is a passage.
Later he does.
Okay, so at some point the Lord determined that Eli did not rebuke his son, so maybe he didn't rebuke him enough.
Perhaps. Maybe he didn't do it early enough like he should have. We do have an account of him doing it, but it seems to be later in life, and that's a good point to make there, Travis. Chapter 8 and verse 5, now looking at Samuel, we want a king, Samuel, because why? We don't want your kids reigning over us, and we don't want your kids reigning over us. Why?
They live for selfish gain.
Yeah, they don't walk in your ways. They take bribes and pervert justice and things like that. But Danica, the real reason Israel wanted a king was why?
Everyone else has them.
Everyone else. 1 Samuel chapter 12. 1 Samuel chapter 12 and verse 12. We want a king to be like all of the other nations. 1 Samuel chapter 12 and verse 12. When you saw that Nahash, the king of the sons of Ammon, came against you, you said to me, "No, but a king shall reign over us, although the Lord your God was your king." This clamoring for a king really doesn't begin until they see other nations coming towards them with their own kings. 1 Samuel chapter 8 will speak to this as well. 1 Samuel chapter 8 and over in verse 6. "Give us a king to judge us." And Samuel prayed to the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people in regard to all that they have said to you. For they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being a king over them." And then Samuel goes on to tell them what the king is going to be like. How is Israel, and this is to Brother Roach's point he made earlier, how is Israel rejecting God when they're asking for a king? And God's pretty clear here. You're asking for this king. Samuel, they haven't rejected you, they've rejected me. How has Israel rejected God by asking for a king?
Because God was already watching over them.
God was already watching over them?
He had kept them for so long through the wars and through the plagues and everything, and they just turned their back on it.
So this is really another episode of Israel and a lack of what? Lack of faith. All right. Bill?
Serving a jealous God, and he didn't want it. He didn't want people to
Serving a jealous God. Okay. Danica?
This is an ongoing thing in Israel, this need for something physical. goes all the way back. I mean, the golden calf came out of that idea of I need the physical thing because I can't trust this light show. I need something physical. It's the same thing here. We've got a God who is better than any physical king, but we need a guide. We need a guide that people can see because nobody else is afraid of you, which was a lie. Everybody was afraid of him. So they wanted that physical thing.
I don't know. Mike?
It seemed like there was an over-reliance of depending on leaders to do everything and people not taking their own, initiative to live holy lives. And it sounds like they were highly dependent on Joshua to the point when he left. I've seen churches where somebody may be a figurehead who's major, and they leave and then the church suffers because there's been a lack of development of all the members to step up when it's time. You follow what I'm saying? We rely too much. They're relying, a king is something we can rely on.
It's not my own faith, it's now the faith of the king that I'm getting by on, or the faith of the leader that I'm getting by on. Sure. Lynn?
I had written down, my answer was trust. They wanted to put their trust in the king. And if you look up trust, it actually says it's what you put your confidence in, and then it is followed by your obligation to it. So you get this idea. They were not trusting in God, and they weren't obliged to follow him. They wanted to follow the king.
Fair point. Anyone else? I wrote down that their fear is leading them to doubt God, which I think we've kind of covered here. And to rely not upon God's power, but they're starting to rely on physical things and their own power, which is exactly what we read about the kings and was the warning that God gave about the kings, right? God, back in the law of Moses, foresees this time period coming. Says when you have a king, make sure the king doesn't do what? Remember this? We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Don't multiply three things. Don't multiply horses. Don't multiply gold and silver. And don't multiply wives. Right? All three lead to, are evidence of false confidence. Look down here at number 4. What did you find out about Baal and the worship of Baal? A god who is associated at times with the weather. Very good.
Fertility.
Pardon?
And fertility.
Fertility, yes. That seems to be a common thread that many of the false gods that they're going to serve end up being tangentially related to fertility. Why might that be? And I would submit it doesn't have anything to do with wanting more kids.
Crops, production of crops.
Crops, maybe.
I think there's a certain appeal in pagan worship that says if we add these acts, physical actions to our worship, then our worship is more appealing physically.
This is a way to attempt to justify fornication and sexual immorality.
Didn't they also sacrifice the babies?
Jeremiah chapter 19 and verse 5 speaks of human sacrifice and child sacrifice in the context of Baal worship. That's right. Lynn?
I had an aha moment.
Okay.
And my aha moment was the actual literal meaning of the word Baal, which is owner or Lord. And then you begin to realize, man, that is departing from God in a big way.
That sure is. Did anyone notice in your studies, like, Rodney, was it you that said weather god? Okay. And then we've got God of fertility. Someone else said that. Anyone else find another association with the Baal? A god of flies. Okay.
Sacrifice, pig sacrifice.
So here's what you see. There wasn't just one singular Baal. Baal worship was rather localized. And depending on where you were, Baal represented something else. And looked different. And you worshipped him differently based upon where you were. It's a very territorial idea for God. Get to the next one real quick. The Ashtoreth, or the Asherah, or Astarte. What did you find here about Ashtoreth, Astarte? Queen of heaven.
Goddess of love and fertility.
Goddess of, so here's another one. And by the way,
of war.
the two on the outside are idols they have uncovered of Ashtoreth or Astarte. In the middle is one of the older Baals that that archaeologists have uncovered. Without being too graphic, the idea of Ashtoreth as a goddess of love and fertility and things like that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? This is how they were viewing things. Sexual immorality was usually associated with the worship of of Ashtoreth. Somebody said moon goddess, right? Moon goddess, goddess of love, goddess of war. All right. And then question number 6, how can the book of Judges help us to live godly in our lives today? Let's make this practical. What of practical benefit do you and I get from the book of Judges? Go ahead, Bruce.
Follow the word of God instead
You
of.
can look at the actions of the judges and the actions of the people and also God's reaction to those actions. And God doesn't change, so he would have those same reactions if we did those same things.
Very good. Okay. Mitch?
Gotta let go of anything that remotely looks like what I think is the standard.
And cling to God and what he reveals the standard is. Very good.
I put 3 things, Tyler. I put who we put our confidence in, and understanding there's consequences to our beliefs, our actions, and understanding that evil does exist.
Solid. Solid. Any of these judges mentioned in the New Testament? Samson is? Gideon is? Barak, yeah, Barak is probably the right way to say that. Yeah, Barak is, yeah. All of these are mentioned in what chapter of the New Testament? Hebrews 11 as examples of what? Examples of faith, all right? So as we're looking to lead lives of faith, live lives of faith in a culture around us that is ungodly, 3 folks we might look to are Gideon and Barak and Samson, seeing as how they're commended to us in Hebrews chapter 11 for living lives of faith. All right, that wraps up lesson number 11. We're on to lesson 12 next Sunday morning. Appreciate your time, appreciate your attention. Thanks, guys.